I'm joined in the Flagship studio today with Jason Park. He is the CEO of Empress Therapeutics. Empress is a company that Flagship announced in about the middle of last year, but of course it's been around for a couple of years before that. And Empress is applying the power of the genetic code to upend small molecule drug discovery. Jason's here to tell us more about that. Jason, tell us a little bit about why now? Why is this the perfect moment for Empress, and how you are converging a couple of different factors into bringing this company forward?
Thank you for having us, or having me, Lindy. So let me start with Empress and what it does, and then I can sort of explain the why now, what's made it possible to do what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And what Empress is doing is we are a genetic chemistry company. What we're doing is we're using the power of genetics to identify chemistry encoded in DNA. And what I mean by that is, just to unpack
explain
that.
a little bit more there.
Is we know that DNA encodes RNA, encodes
Mm-hmm.
proteins. It's a central dogma of biology. There are certain proteins that actually catalyze chemical reactions, enzymes.
Okay.
And it's now possible to think about this code going from DNA to RNA to proteins, specifically biosynthetic proteins or enzymes, and specific chemical products of those proteins. So in fact, it's sort of like an extension of the central dogma from DNA to chemistry now. Okay. And for that to be possible, it's actually similar to some of what we've seen in the tech world, where you have a simple idea. It's, I want a computer to be able to recognize an image. I want a computer to be able to mimic human language or interpret human language. Well, what is language but a code? And DNA is in fact a code as well. And what was necessary for some of those advances? Well, you needed compute power. You needed the algorithms, yes. But one of the big enabling factors was data. You needed enough data to iterate back in and really understand the rules of images or understand the rules of language. And we know AI works there. And that's exactly what Empress has been doing. We've been applying AI, natural language processing, and effectively treating genetics like a language.
Oh, that's incredible. So we've talked a lot about AI and we've heard a lot about it this week. We've been hearing about it more and more. Tell us a little bit about what's unique in the way that Empress is using AI as a tool to help accomplish your goals.
Yeah, so we think of AI in a couple different ways, AI and machine learning. So one is, I think we've all seen how people are using AI to design new things and generate new things. And there's some really interesting advances there. Another way that AI is generally used is to interpret and synthesize huge amounts of data. Okay. Language as an example of that. And really that's how we're using it. We're using a particular form of artificial intelligence or a domain from natural language processing. And then we use other techniques like causal inference, causal discovery, to be able to make sense out of those genetic sequences and the chemistries that they encode. Okay.
Jason, I want to come back to something that you said earlier, and that was extending the central dogma to now chemistry. Why does that matter? What's the implication of that in terms of drug discovery and development?
Well, so Empress is a small molecule therapeutic, and so we're talking about chemistry when we say small molecules usually. And the pharmaceutical industry started with chemistry. It started with our recognition that out in nature there are compounds that impact human physiology and biology and can treat diseases. And as over the last 100 years, we've seen tremendous advances, but at the end of the day, it's still an unpredictable, haphazard, artisanal process. It's unpredictable. It's risky. And so much of the process is focused on increasing the libraries, increasing the number of compounds that you might be able to throw against a particular disease target. And what we're doing is almost in a way completely orthogonal to that. It's asking a different question. It's saying, if there are important chemistries, on some level, and we know that they can be encoded in DNA, on some level, shouldn't the most important chemistries to human biology be encoded in DNA that you can find inside the human body? So if that were true, that means we're all walking around with enriched libraries of some of the most important chemistries in the world inside of us, just waiting to be discovered. And that was our bet. And it was a completely different way to think about it.
So I'm picking up on two different things that we should be paying attention to. This idea of chemistry getting us to small molecules, which is a modality that we're all familiar with and is really a wonderful way for patients to be treated. And also this idea of going from DNA to chemistry, but there's some implications there about how you think about how you can then rapidly iterate or even get to a place where you are programming drug discovery. Am I capturing that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the 2 points, one is this concept of DNA to chemistry. It's, and that was your first question. It's a simple idea. It's an old idea. It's now possible thanks to technology. And then the second is, if that's true, and it appears to be true, how do you figure out what the most important chemistries are? And that's why we're looking inside the body. We think that's where you're most likely to find chemistries that will impact the human body. And that's where other technologies allow us to really quickly take that genetic data, convert it into chemistry in the lab, test it, learn from it, and just do it over and over again and continue improving.
So tell us a little bit, now that we've got the concepts, tell us a little bit about the platform that Empress has built and what data you're starting to generate. What are you starting to see from the platform?
So the way we think about our platform is it's one of reverse translation. It actually mimics so much of what we've been doing ever since we sequenced the human genome. One of the most powerful ways to think about causality and disease is you look for variations in the human genome and their associations with outcomes, with phenotypes, disease. What we chose to focus on was the microbial metagenome. It's all the other genes inside the human body. We can also look at human genetics. There's other aspects that we look at. We look at patients who are healthy, patients who are sick, and we can do comparative genomics to understand what's different about the chemistries in these individuals. What chemistries might actually protect or treat disease? Conversely, we can also ask the question, what chemistries might cause disease? Once we know that, we have a hypothesis. So the entire computational part of the company is designed to understand and decipher that genetic data, generate hypotheses, and then we use technologies like synthetic biology, analytical chemistry technologies, including mass spectrometry, omics, which we always hear about. These are all tools that allow us to very quickly understand, what do these chemistries actually do? Do they act on a target that makes sense in the context of the disease in which we started? And do these look like good drugs?
So Jason, earlier in our conversation, you talked about we had a hypothesis and now it's looking like it's true. What are some of the proof points that you now have and that maybe you're sharing in your conversations this week at JP Morgan that are starting to substantiate what we thought originally when we founded Empress?
So we've been thinking about this for 6 years. Probably 2 years ago is when we started, 2 to 3 years ago, we started doing our first experiment. So it was asking the question, is there something there? Is there a there? The next year was about building the platform, the technology platform that allows you to do this at scale. And we now know it works because in about a 12-month period of time, we went from clinical data to various compounds, multiple compounds against multiple targets that look like any standard small molecule therapeutic program. The compounds look and act like drugs, and they're well on their way to becoming potential clinical candidates. So we know it works, and so now we're looking at different disease areas, and that's actually one of the topics as JP Morgan's about partnering. Since we know the platform works, we know the products that come out of the platform look like drugs and potential drugs. We now know that we can tap into other therapeutic areas, access partners for their samples and their downstream expertise.
Fantastic. So we announced Empress this past year, but I know we've been hard at work on this for 6 years, more recently 2 to 3 years. And you've made a lot of progress over the last year in the platform, also building the team. Give us a vision of what's coming up for Empress over the next 12 to 18 months. What should we expect from the company?
So where we are today is we're still about 40 people, so we're still a small company. We're still small and agile. But we've added some important leadership, which may give hints as to what's coming. So we have a very notable Chief Scientific Officer, Murray McKinnon, who's helped put multiple blockbuster products on the market, 30 plus clinical candidates. So we're obviously looking ahead towards putting some of our compounds into the clinic. We're looking at next year. We have many, many more compounds behind that, many other disease areas that we want to access. And as I was just referencing, partnering is going to be a big part of that. So we actually recently hired a chief business officer, Virginia Finnerty-Brooks, to help us execute on the strategy of what will we keep, what will we partner out, how do we accelerate getting medicines to patients a whole lot faster. And really at this point, we know the platform works, so it's going to be turn the crank over and over again.
Great. So we have technology coming together with genetics, chemistry, with some molecules that are headed towards the clinic in the next 12 to 18 months, maybe a little longer. Thank you, Jason, for telling us more about Empress. We're very glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Lindy.